No, a goldfish does not have a 3-second memory. No, the North Star is not the brightest star. No, coal doesn't turn into diamonds. Surprised? There are literally hundreds of more pieces of information where that came from in my book, Facts That Aren't True. Click the link in the description to learn more. Well, everybody, it is time for me to be the subject of humiliation on this channel. I've been wanting to do a fact check video on myself, one that's really extensive, for a long time. And this will by no means be exhaustive, but it's the most I can come up with. I tend to do my own version of community notes for my videos. Whenever somebody points out a really bad error, I will pin their comment to the top of a video. It's happened pretty recently, so you've probably seen it. Other times I will, if I realize I did it, sometimes other people will point it out too, but instead of pinning their comment, I'll write my own kind of community note and give kind of a broader description of why I screwed it up, or why what I said is true, but I wasn't careful enough in my wording, so it sounds false, or something like that. Now, I simply cannot remember all the instances of that. I uploaded about 350 videos just last year, and this year, I don't know, I've uploaded a video every single day except for one. So I couldn't go through to search for all the community notes. That's why I reached out to you, the viewers. Now, I'm doing this because I think the truth matters. That's my agenda here. As a content creator, everybody has a brand, something their channel is about. And I know a lot of content creators are extremely protectant on their brand because they think that they're the knowledge czar. And I mean, I think I am too. I try hard and I try to only stick on topics that I know things about so I don't look like such an idiot. And I know that I'll grossly misinform people if I start talking about the economy or whatever. But I don't mind being wrong, and so many people are so defensive and they gaslight their own viewers and they censor stuff, and I don't do that because I don't care about being wrong, because that's how you learn things. So we'll get started. I wrote down just a few instances of things I could remember off the top of my head, and these are going to be in no particular order. Fairly recently, in the video titled something like Teaching Cosmology to a Brick Wall, I made a really stupid mistake talking about WIMPs. Weakly interacting massive particles. That's one of the hypotheses for dark matter. And I knew that dark matter didn't interact with electromagnetic radiation, but somebody asked me about dark matter and I said, well, we think it could be WIMPs. That's one of the ideas, and WIMPs. And then I started just freeballing it. And I said that, well, I think maybe WIMPs it's extremely diffuse matter, so it can't be picked up by anything. No, it's no form of ordinary matter. It's not like that. Whatever it is, it's exotic. Somebody pointed this out. And as I was saying it in that conversation, I remember being like, I'm probably screwing this up, but whatever. In many videos, when discussing morality, specifically on the topic of objective morality versus subjective morality, I have for quite a while, I would say around a year, been saying, well, you can't derive an ought from an is, so you can't have objective morality. I think I need to stop saying this because after I thought about it, that's not exactly how it works. There can be objective moral facts. They can exist in the universe. But the problem of arbitration, the ought from the is, that doesn't mean that objective moral facts can't exist, but it would mean that you can't logically go from, these are the moral facts, therefore I ought to follow them. That's the ought from the is problem that does still exist, but the idea that you can't derive an ought from an is means moral facts can't exist, I think that's probably not true, so I need to stop doing that. To be clear, I am still really deeply skeptical. I I guess you could probably call me a moral anti-realist. I don't think that they exist. But you cannot derive an ought from an is means they can't exist. I don't think that follows. Oh man, in the Occam's razor video that I uploaded a few days ago. So some of you may have seen that got re-uploaded. It was either the next day or 2 days later. And that's because I said something really stupid. I asked the viewers to decide between which of these two, which of them is more likely to be true. And then I said that A is more likely to be true. This is not necessarily the case. It's not impossible that all but one people that works at a tech company is a member of an activist group. So you can't say that this is guaranteed to be more likely to be true. What I should have done was left out the part about not being in a climate activist group. And that's what the re-upload shows. It just says Zoe works at a tech company, or Zoe works at a tech company and is a member of a climate activist group. I added this extra thing because the entire video is about Occam's razor, so I thought I wanted to trick you. And I knew if it only said one thing on the top, then it would just be way too obvious. A viewer pointed out the error in that, and then some people explained it. Well, it was the same person explained it to me on Discord, and then I figured out how I screwed that up. I don't remember which video this was, but I was discussing the Johannine comma, and I falsely attributed that to the Gospel of John. The Johannine comma is in the Epistle of John, not the Gospel of John. This one kind of cracks me up. It drives me crazy because I'm so pissed at myself for screwing this up. But so when I debated Andrew Wilson, I used this paper as an example of high religiosity correlating with dysfunction. And that's what the title says. But I fell for the not reading beyond the headlines thing, and this highlighted section shows that it's a study about the claim. This isn't the conclusion of the study. And according to this study, they find, the differences are actually pretty trivial. Now, I included this in my fact check video, the post-mortem for the debate. And I very clearly beforehand show me, I show the part where I use this, and then at the end I use the Tiger King meme of I cut out the word financially, so it says recover from this. And it was really weird. Not everybody, but the comments were flooded with people saying, oh my God, Peterson included the paper and it debunked his own claim. Yeah, this is the fact-checking video. That was the point. I don't get why people thought that I was using this against Andrew Wilson. I really don't get it. And then the infamous Galileo affair debacle between Inspiring Philosophy, myself, and then that eventually included Tim. So what did I screw up? I said Galileo was charged with heresy. He wasn't. He was charged with vehement suspicion of heresy. There's no shortage of sources that say he was charged with heresy. But, that's wrong, and I was wrong. I said the church charged him. No, the Inquisition charged him. I didn't really think there was a difference. There is a difference. Check out my Tim O'Neill video. I made the argument that there was sufficient scientific evidence at the time to dismiss geocentrism. Now, there could have been. It's just that Galileo, because he still created a model with circular orbits, his model still required there to be epicycles. And I didn't realize that, but I said... And there are a few other things about the phases of Venus, which I would still stand by, but I made the case way too strong that they had sufficient reason to abandon the geocentric model. I do still think that if Galileo had presented a better model, I'm not convinced that it necessarily would have gone well for him. And that's because of the language that's used in his sentencing. Now, Tim O'Neill disagrees with me on that. I don't know what Tony Christie's opinion on this is. I didn't watch any of the content they produced about me because I don't care. Oh, the other really big blunder from that was I repeated the claim that at Galileo's trial, he produced a letter from Bellarmine saying that he had permission to talk about heliocentrism hypothetically. That's totally false. Even Michael Jones, he didn't use the case note example, but even he said that Galileo had permission to talk about it hypothetically, and he just didn't. He had a complete injunction. Now, Tony Christie thinks that he had permission to talk about it hypothetically, I think. Tim and I discussed that, but I don't see that anywhere. Now we get to your submissions. So this is my reacting to my stalker video. I pinned this comment here. Biggest mistake you ever made is saying you won the chicken debate. Yeah, no, I totally lost that debate, didn't I? The most profane mistake you've ever made is claiming there's no convincing evidence for a deity when there's proof of Spanky's divinity all around us. I am sorry, Spanky, or you're over here, aren't you? I'm sorry, Spanky. Holy. On multiple occasions, you've referred to archaeology or paleontology in reference to human ancestors. The correct field of study is called paleoanthropology. Paleoanthropology is the interdisciplinary study of human evolution through the fossil and archaeological record. See, I'm not sure what I specifically would have said to have goofed that up. I mean, I typically talk about archaeology when discussing human civilization, and like, you know, digging up bones and artifacts from sites. I think that would still be archaeology, but yeah, the human evolution side, sure, I'll try to remember that. Okay, you guys can read this if you want, but basically I said there are multiple countries where so on and so forth, and then I mentioned Tibet. Tibet is a semi-autonomous region. I knew that. I just when I said country, I was just going to name all these regions, and everything I said was a country except for Tibet. I guess fair enough. Not referring to a specific video, but I believe you've claimed and agreed with the so-called flat EEG graph community that they lack a model. So this is an example of just not being 100% clear when I talk. I actually don't let them get away with saying they don't have a model. They do have a model, and this person's basically expressing the same thought I have. If you make, literally, if you just say that the earth is flat, then you do have a model. Your model is the flat earth, and they think the sun and the moon are above us. That's all that is enough for a model, and that is disprovable. Now, I have said things like they can't create a model. What I mean by that is they can't create a model that works. I'm unsure if you still assert that thoughts are physical. I definitely do. You've stated this multiple times. On a technical level, that's true that thoughts are generated by the brain and expressed through some electrical activity, making them physical in that sense. So by physical, I don't mean it's made of stuff. Energy is physical, like electromagnetic radiation. That still counts as physical. But if that's the case, wouldn't that mean everything we see, even hallucinations, would also be physical? So I would say yes, but now we get into this tricky place of, do I mean that they're real? Like, if I hear voices in my head, are there actually voices? If I see a figure standing in the corner, is there actually a figure standing in the corner? Well, it's true that I hear voices and that I see a figure. By physical, I just mean, where does it come from? It's a product of the brain, which is physical. That still makes it physical. By this logic, even dreams would be considered physical phenomena. Yeah, I think that you can say that. That's fine. I'm conflicted. I agree that these experiences originate from physical processes, and that's really all I mean. But I'm not convinced that they are physical in the same categorical way as matter or energy. Now, yeah, this is the weird thing. What is the substance of a thought? Are qualia, or is qualia? I don't know if that's singular or plural. Does qualia exist, or is it something else? Or is qualia the same thing as brain states, or is it something else entirely? If it's something else entirely, then perhaps it's not physical. So there's this idea of I can't remember what her name is. There's the woman that lives in the black and white room, and she knows everything about color scientifically, but her whole life she's lived in a black and white room. She goes outside and sees the color red for the first time. And that thought experiment is meant to disprove physicalism, but I think that that's really incredibly weak, because when she sees red for the first time, so she knows literally everything about red, but then she sees the color red, and so in her mind, something new exists there, despite the fact that she already knew everything about red. So the only place where something new manifests is in her mind, so physicalism can't be true. I just think that that's ridiculous, because where does the information that her brain received about the red come from? It comes from the photons emanating from the red object. Still physicalism. Third, you claimed once or twice that you believe in metaphysical things. Can you maybe share about this? I think metaphysical always means... I don't think I've ever said that. I'm not sure if I've expressed the opposite of that before, but I kind of think that metaphysics is bullshit. Now, what I mean by that, a better way to put that would be, and I've talked to PhD physicists who think kind of the same thing. What I mean by that is metaphysics isn't necessarily useful. If you say there's no such thing as metaphysics, that in and of itself is a metaphysical claim. So you've kind of created a contradiction, like saying there are no true facts. But I think that metaphysical claims are kind of meaningless because they're not provable or disprovable. Now, you could walk through and determine that a metaphysical claim is internally inconsistent and contradictory. And I guess therefore that you could say that metaphysical claim isn't true. But otherwise, no, I just think that they're utterly worthless, which is literally why I invented Spanky. And I said all that before reading the very last part of your comment here, Pain981. But yes, we basically agree. And now here are the comments from the post I made a while back asking people to give every instance of me being wrong. There's over 100 comments, so we'll see how long this takes. Oh, the GIF thing. We're going to see a few of these, I'm pretty sure. I write about this in my book, Facts That Aren't True. Guys, every word has its meaning and its pronunciation at some point dictated totally by fiat. Brett Favre's last name, it's spelled Favre, but it's pronounced Favre. Get over it. Colonel, Colonel. Colonel? Colonel. Get over it. Acronyms aren't words. Okay, so they don't necessarily have to follow any particular rule. There certainly is no rule about you pronounce the letters in the acronym the way that the letters are pronounced in the word. The person who invented the GIF pronounces it that way. They're the inventor of it. That's how it works. But G stands for graphics. SCUBA is an acronym, self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. So if we take the way every one of those letters is pronounced in the words, then SCUBA becomes SCUBA. Laser, light amplification by stimulation of emitting radiation, becomes LASIR. Nobody says that. You can't use the first letter rule for GIF because then you have to change the way you say the other words. Get over it. Ruining a Flat Earther's Day video at about the 6-minute mark, you said, because the Earth is a sphere, its angular momentum is different everywhere. This is incorrect. Its angular momentum is the same everywhere and is the angular momentum of Earth. The surface tangential velocity is different depending on latitude is likely what you meant. I don't know if I actually agree, but I don't have a physics background. I plugged this into ChatGPT. Take it with a grain of salt, but it is unpacking everything. And ChatGPT is saying that, yeah, you do have a different angular momentum on different locations on the Earth. So what we're talking about here is what's responsible for causing the Coriolis effect, right? I don't know if this is a case where it kind of sort of depends what you mean, but I don't know. I'm not tempted to abandon this one yet. I told ChatGPT, yeah, but somebody told me I'm wrong, and they said the only thing that changes is the tangential velocity, and it's saying, well, yes, the Earth has one rotation, but the angular momentum is different across its surface, not just the tangential velocity. So I don't know. That's something that's going to have to be like double fact-checked by commenters. You were way off on your telescope size and needed to see dinosaurs at 65 million light years away. I was totally guessing. But if you don't know what this is about, somebody asked me, you know, the farther away the farther you look out into space, you look backwards in time. So if you're 65 million light years away and you look at Earth, you're looking at it at a time when there were dinosaurs. But how big would the telescope have to be to have the actual resolution to make out a dinosaur on the surface rather than just a point of light? So the light spreads out. It follows the inverse square law. Every time you double your distance, you're only getting 1/4 the number of photons. I don't know. I was just throwing something out there. So they said they did the math. So it would need to be about 5.9 light years across. That's insane. All right, fact checking the fact checkers. And again, I don't know if this is really how this works, but it has these formulas. It tells you how far or how big your telescope would need to be if you were in low Earth orbit versus on the moon. But it only went to the sun. So I said, okay, what if you were 65 million light years away? This is giving me, again, I don't know how to do this math. I don't know if this is correct, but this is giving me a wildly different answer. This is saying 3,300 light years wide. Now, specifically, it's using 12 meters because that's the length of a T-Rex. So it has to have the resolution to pick out something that's 12 meters across. I don't know how you did your math for yours, if you're just saying to be able to see the Earth or something. We have wildly different answers. Have fun fact-checking both those claims if you want. Yep, another GIF comment. Guys, I'm never going to say the hard G. You're never going to get me to do it. This comment is addressing that study from the Andrew Wilson debate. We already did that one. Here's another Andrew Wilson. Anyways, you said Mars did not have an atmosphere. It has a very thin atmosphere, enough for NASA to... Yes, I'm aware of that. They called the drone Ingenuity. Yes, I'm aware of that. And there is... Yes. So the Martian atmosphere is less than 1% the density of Earth's. It kind of fluctuates because the Martian poles grow during the Martian winter. So a lot of dry ice gets deposited and then it sublimates in the winter. So it actually fluctuates, I think, between a little bit less than 1% and a little bit above 1%. It's just kind of a lazy case of saying it lost it, but technically if there's one molecule of gas, it has an atmosphere, right? We have a demarcation problem here. Where to start? So much fake news. DNA, haha. No, you're right. There's no such thing as DNA, my bad. Got it all figured out. Of course, we can now cure everything. Did I say we can cure everything? I'm not sure. If I did, then that's wrong. Even selectively breed to produce tall basketball players. Jeez. Well, I mean, funny enough, so it sounds like eugenics, and eugenics isn't good, but not a lot of people know this. So China, right? They do so many insane things. Like when they were going to host, when they hosted the Olympics in 2008, they knew that many years ahead of time. And so they created these programs to create gymnasts and other athletes. And these kids, their entire purpose was for the country to not breed them, but in a way kind of breed them and train them to represent their country for the Olympics. And there was probably a lot of tomfoolery going on with the judging. I remember that back in 2008. But Yao Ming is the child of the tallest woman and the tallest man in China at that time. And it was at the direction of the Chinese Communist Party. I feel like I have to be so tepid here. Maybe they weren't the tallest man and woman, but yes, they basically had an arranged marriage by the country to try to produce him. Today is National Penguin Day. This was like 3 weeks ago, so whatever. They are being unfairly treated lately. Tariff to... Oh, okay, it's a troll. I mean, it's Poe's Law, though. You can't tell parody from reality. Creationists are so stupid that people pretending to be stupid are indistinguishable. You once said the mortality rate from hyenas giving birth is around 50%. I found that it's about 20% for a first-time mother, but the mortality rate for the cubs in the litter is around 60%. Okay, I'll believe that. Satanists don't actually worship Satan. I've never said that they do. Oh, here's that thing about the Epistle of John. There you go. You kept calling the r in the gravitational force equation the radius, and stating you need a radius for gravity, implying only a circle or sphere would cause a gravitational force. I mention this only because you repeated it many times. The r is the distance between the center of the mass of the two objects. It's not the radius of something. Yeah, I remember this, and there was a very long back and forth in the comments between me and some other person. This got mentioned by me because I was talking to a flat earther, and they said electrostatics is we can use electrostatics instead of gravity, and the electrostatic formula is structured exactly like the universal gravitation formula. It's just that it uses charge instead of mass, but it has r squared on the bottom. And I said, oh, okay, well then you have to have a spherical object. You can't have a flat Earth. It doesn't work that way because of the radius. Now, I still don't agree with this criticism because the r, it is a radius because whether it's a massive object and the gravitational force or the gravitational field, whatever, exuded or extended from it, or a point charge and the strength of the force with respect to your distance from the point charge, either way, it is a radius because it weakens in every single direction equally, and only a sphere has those characteristics. Put a magnet under a piece of paper and then put some iron filings over it, and what you'll see is that the force in the middle is not as strong as the force on the edge. You can't have universal acceleration or anything with a point charge or a gravitational center of mass in the center of a flat object. It can't work. The only way for that force, even if you're substituting electrostatics, to universally be able to explain anything is if it's working over within a spherical landscape. So I was pointing that out, and there was this huge fight of, haha, Peterson, you got caught being wrong, and now you're just making up excuses. No, I'm not. That's literally how that works. It is a radius. Even if you say it doesn't come from the object, it's not the object's radius, it still is a radius. If you take one measurement, it is just a distance, but you can make that measurement. If you can, that same distance, you'll get the same strength of the force, whether it's gravity or electrostatics, literally no matter where you are, as long as you maintain that same distance from the center to wherever you are. And again, that only describes a sphere. You said Earth doesn't have a negative charge. Yeah, it does have a slight negative charge. This is me kind of not-ing the flat earthers. This is off subject, but I want to read this. Do crime debate, like what causes crime, what makes it worse, what would fix it in most crime areas. I want to see Peterson radicalized into our filthy commie army, haha. So, I mean, I'm a leftist, I guess, but no, I'm never going to do that because, especially with regard to this, you guys are wrong and very stupidly wrong. I already know a good deal about this. I mean, the book Behave by Robert Sapolsky lays out a tremendous amount of scientific evidence showing that crime is caused by the most unfair of circumstances in some cases. Well, I wouldn't say directly caused by, but some people are just born so unlucky, whether it's like biological or where they happen to live, and that increases the likelihood for crime. I haven't started reading it yet, but I got this book at Barnes & Noble a couple weeks ago because this is an area that I really want to know a lot more about, because I believe in creating a justice system that's more progressive and restorative instead of just punitive and reactionary. However, so in California, it was on the ballot just last election cycle. We raised the minimum threshold or whatever for theft for a felony versus a misdemeanor, and crime exploded. And now people like Hassan Piker, who I support a lot of the things he says, but he is sometimes just an unthinkable moron. From inside the walls of his castle, inside the gated community that he lives in, he said, "No, no, no, don't be tough on crime, because that does nothing about root causes. Criminals know what they can get away with, and they exploit it." Several years ago in Mexico, their president, I don't remember what his name was, but he took a radically different approach to the all the cartel stuff, with this sort of hugs, not drugs policy or whatever. And he invested all this money into community outreach and education and trying to tackle the root cause of what's making all of this horrible crime happen. And the violent crime rate when he was president was so disastrously high. Okay, yeah, I got that wrong. So this is you can't see all of it, but this is a real life lore video. That's where I found out about this. It's really good. It was the rate at which people were disappearing in the country just absolutely skyrocketed. But the system's kind of weird where it doesn't count people that disappeared as homicides or deaths. So the homicide rate very likely exploded as well. You recently said we produce antigens in our AIS. I don't know what AIS stands for. The only time I can recently remember talking about immunity was I was talking about how your white blood cells are sort of programmed in your thymus, and your body does that by just creating every permutation it can imagine of protein foldings and shapes or whatever, which are kind of like the antigens for the white blood cells to be able to recognize and latch on to. So I don't know what you're specifically referring to here. Sorry. The whole men aren't stronger than females thing I've heard you say is kind of weird. There's no way I've ever said that, because I don't think that. Maybe I just screwed up and said the wrong word. Like sometimes I say is when I meant to say isn't. I mean, we all do that. So I don't know, but I don't think I've ever said that. I definitely don't think that men are not stronger than women. In one video, you looked up the definition of insanity and remarked that the definition you found was valid until it got into legal terms. When you found it was a legal definition, you seemed put off in general. This is a common misconception, but insanity is literally a legal term. Never heard that before. It's not a medical or psychological term. It only applies in the court of law. What I'm guessing is going on here is, like in psychology, you wouldn't say somebody's insane. You would diagnose them with something specific, schizophrenia, major depressive disorder, whatever. And you would only like submit or use the term insanity in the court of law. I can believe that. That makes perfect sense. I've heard you ask the chat, what is it doing, on numerous occasions, when I'm sure you did, in fact, know what it was doing. Seems dishonest to me, Hail Spanky. Yeah, I mean, no, sometimes I really have no clue what's going on, but other times, yeah, you can kind of tell they're just trying to buy time or avoid the question. You said the sun would become a supergiant. It doesn't have enough mass. You need at least 10 solar masses. It will just be a rather mundane red giant. So yes, not a supergiant, my bad. Man v. Bear. Jesus fucking Christ. We're not doing that again. But by the way, I'm absolutely not wrong. Wow, this one started a fight, it looks like. You've said something like 2 plus 2 is not always 4 because you can change the number base. Don't remember the video, but I think I commented that they're 2. Anyway, 2 plus 2 does equal 4 always if the numbers are natural numbers and addition is standard addition. The base of the number can change how numbers are written, but not the numbers themselves. So, yeah, this, okay. Yeah, that's enough slices! Let me confess something to you. I don't even know what a base system is. We count time with base 12. What does that mean? I don't actually know what that means. I know it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then it starts over again. We measure angles in, I don't know if that's like a base 60 system or what. The whole 2 plus 2 equals something else if you change your base system. That's not a Planet Peterson original idea. That is something I have heard other people say, really competent people, and I've just repeated it, I guess. I did a little digging into this, and it's like if you use a base 2 system, then the way you write 4 is you write 100, but it technically still means 4, I guess. I don't know. And then as far as what does this mean with regard to logic, because that's where this gets brought up. People say 2 plus 2 equals 4 is eternally true, and that's when I bring up the base system thing. So if 2 plus 2 equals 100, which is just a different way of writing 4, that's a math thing, but logically, what does that mean? Again, I'm not the guy, so maybe I'll just quit saying it. For the sake of the clergy, we need a definitive statement on the relationship between Zip Zop and Spanky. So yeah, Zip Zop is it's part of the way that Spanky reveals the divine truth. It's the equivalent of the Holy Spirit. Okay, this commenter, who's a geologist, is talking about, so young Earth creationists like to parrot this thing that you don't know how many radioactive elements you started with and the ratio, so you're just making an assumption. They use the candle burning analogy for this. Now, I'll discuss what they said here, but when I typically address this, I bring up that we know how to account for this by using what we call isochron dating techniques. And I don't always remember exactly how it works, but you take the ratio of the radioactive isotope, the non-radioactive isotope of that same element, and then the daughter product that the radiometric isotope is going to turn into. You take the ratio of all three of those in multiple samples and you compare them, and that'll produce a linear graph, and it converges to T0. So you don't need to know the initial conditions for doing that. Now, what this person's talking about is some pretty sophisticated like crystallography, and this is specifically for the zircon crystals. So zircon crystals start off with no lead in them because the way I've heard people say this before too, the specific chemistry with regard to the formation of the crystal lattice, it expels lead. We just know that it can't fit any lead in it. So any lead present is a product of radioactive decay. The seeds are not a live thing. I've gotten some hate on that a few different times. I use seeds. If I have ever said that they're not alive, which I'm pretty sure I have said, yes, that's not strictly true. They are metabolically active, but they're basically indistinguishable from something that isn't alive. I use seeds as a way to describe that the difference between life and not alive is that metabolic activity and how it's induced, the change of state from not alive, or not, it's alive, but kind of sort of not really, from not alive to alive, is induced by mere physical changes as well. So I just use that as a demonstration of the life from non-life logic being is just such a lazy talking point. So I'm trying to guide people through, or guide people out of that, rather. You called Candace Owens an idiot, and I believe you grossly overstated her intelligence. Yeah, probably. That time you wore a headband. Oh, the Japanese work culture thing. So, yeah, I mean, I was just freely speaking, but yeah, I said Japan isn't as much of a work until you die type of culture that we are, and lots of people pushed back on that. I was thinking of it in terms of, in America, like when you first meet somebody, or if you're trying to talk about who you are as a person and accomplishments, we just talk about work. And I just kind of thought it was different there, and a lot of people were telling me, no, it's very much like that. He said for a long time that Latin is a cladistic ancestor of English. It drove me crazy. Yeah, I haven't said that for like 2 years at this point, but I use the language analogy for evolution all the time because it's the most perfect analogy. Nobody is born speaking a different language than their parents. We can acknowledge that that's true. So, and I used to say something like, is it ever the case that one day a Latin speaker gave birth to an English speaker? And yeah, so that was stupid. There's a huge, I don't know, like a third or something of English has Latin roots, but that's from borrowing, not from like direct ancestorship. Are we allowed to bring up haircuts? Well, that's all, folks. So here's to a future of hopefully making fewer mistakes. I'll see you tomorrow.